advise. The two stood before the dilapidated brick home. It was late at night as Sissy looked at Mamma Toups. Sissy was scanning her facial expression for some sign of what to expect, but she received no portents. It was incredibly humid, even more so than she was used to. It made the air feel thick, stagnant, and hard to breathe. That, mixed with the nervous feeling in her gut, caused Sissy's skin to be saturated with sweat. The night air was also host to the buzzing of mosquitoes and the staunch fragrance of honeysuckle. Sissy had never been to this part of the southern woods before. In fact, Mamma Toups herself had told Sissy to never come out this way. She had been studying under Mamma Toups for 12 seasons now. Tonight was to be her final lesson. All she was allowed to bring was her satchel, which she had slung over her shoulder. It carried all of her tools for her craft.
"Are you ready, child?"
Mamma Toups asked. The sudden break of silence startled Sissy back from her mental wanderings.
"Yes,"
Sissy answered timidly, because in truth she didn't know if she was ready or not. After all, she didn't know what was about to happen, so how could she be prepared? If she wanted to finish her training, however, then the answer had to be yes. Mamma Toups started to walk towards the front door of the house before them. It looked completely out of place. There was no road leading up to it, and nature, it seemed, was well in the process of reclaiming it. Ivy had snaked its way onto almost every surface of the porch. They appeared like veins on the face of a living home. Only the front door was oddly spared of its presence. Mamma Toups paused for only a moment to mutter something under her breath that Sissy couldn't hear before Mamma opened the door and walked inside. Sissy watched as Mamma Toups seemed to disappear into the shadows, and for a brief instant Sissy was alone outside. Sissy took a deep breath and followed her teacher, the door closing behind them. Sissy was as good as blind in this darkness, but before her eyes could even begin to adjust, a single match was struck before her. The dark, umber face and pristine skin of Mamma Toups became illuminated by the matchlight as she transferred the flame into an oil lamp. The wide and serious glare that Sissy had become accustomed to over the past 3 years stared at her from across the lantern flame. Mamma Toups let the slightest of smiles grace her face as a means of comfort for her pupil. The gesture was so subtle that most would have missed it, especially in this dim light. Sissy noticed immediately and felt the knot in her stomach relax slightly.
"Come, child. We should not linger in the foyer. There is someone you must meet, and it would be rude to stand idle in the entrance of her home for too long."
Sissy puzzled over this statement. Surely no one lived here. The place looked to have been abandoned for more than 50 years prior at least. Dust covered the floors and looked to be undisturbed until now. The ivy outside had completely enveloped the windows, explaining the pure darkness of the interior. The cobwebs that hung from the ceiling were the only evidence of life in this home. Normally rats, birds, stray cats, and bats would have made their dwelling in a place like this, but no trace of their lot could be detected. The odor of honeysuckle had been replaced by the stench of mildew and decay. Sissy quickly caught up to Mamma Toups, who had made her way down a hall that passed the entrances to the living room and kitchen areas. Both rooms appeared to be in good order, just dusty and untouched. They soon made their way to a large wooden door at the end of the hallway.
"Well, let's see if she's home."
Mamma Toups seemed to inquire out loud as she opened the door. Inside was a large room filled with random oddities and bric-a-brac. Every surface was covered with candles, books, trinkets, jars, or some unidentifiable item that Sissy couldn't make out. In the center of the room was a large table, covered similarly with candles and books. She was staring at the table when something on the other side shifted in its seat. Sissy jumped back and would have screamed, if not for her hand, which had involuntarily flown to cover her mouth.
"Who is this scared little girl you bring me, Talmia?"
The voice from across the table spoke.
"This is my newest apprentice, Sissy Overton. Sissy, this is High Priestess and Queen Ava Duvalier."
As Mamma Toups said Ava's name, every candle in the room sparked to life. Sissy was again surprised, but made a much better show of hiding it this time. She had never heard Mamma Toups called Talmia before, and was that her first name? Sissy wondered. There was a sudden feeling of jealousy as she realized that the person across the table must know secrets about Mama that she did not. Sissy now saw a woman sitting at the table. She had a mane of black and ashen gray hair that felt like thick candy floss around a sharp, alluring face. Her skin took the color of acorns, and her eyes flashed a startling gold. It was hard to tell her age in the flickering candlelight. One moment she looked as if she could be Mamma Toups' grandmother, and in the next, they could have passed for sisters. The shadowed woman had an almost feline smile, and she would narrow her eyes and pull her smile up when she glanced at Sissy. It did not appear to be a kind gesture, though. It seemed almost predatory.
Why bring this fearful dove into my den, if she is your pupil, Talmia?
Because, my queen.
Mamma Toups started as she walked out of the room and began to shut the two inside together.
It is her last lesson.
Mamma Toups quickly shut the door as Ava spat in anger and yelled out in a voice that could have rivaled a thunderous lightning bolt.
Lies!
All the candles flickered heavily as a phantom wind stirred through the room. Sissy was not sure, but she also thought she heard Toups lock the door behind her, and her heart was racing. Her lessons were often terrifying, however, so Sissy took a deep breath and steadied herself. Ava was still angrily staring at the now-closed door when Sissy said, very awkwardly,
I'm honored to meet you, Queen Duvalier.
Ava's eyes snapped back to Sissy almost as if she had forgotten about this new guest. The politeness had seemed to help as Ava nodded and her smile slightly returned.
My apologies for that outburst. Talmia has taken to teasing me as of late, and it is a joke that I no longer find humorous. This time, she has taken it too far, I believe. Since this is your last lesson, you have no idea what we are talking about either. Apprentices always enter the last lesson blind to its purpose. Well, unfortunately, you will not find that lesson here. I cannot believe that Talmia would take the joke so far as to involve an apprentice that she is teaching.
What is the last lesson, then?
Sissy asked. Ava pondered for a moment, then her face pulled back into a smile.
Well, if Talmia wants to make a mockery of this lesson, then so shall I. I'll tell you.
Ava motioned for Sissy to pull up close. Sissy found a chair close by. She pulled the chair close to the table and sat down excitedly. Ava now had her full attention. Ava repositioned herself and then intertwined her fingers on the desk in front of her.
The last lesson is a test. You must use the accumulation of all your lessons to survive. The apprentice is pitted against a spirit.
Those words hung in the air like ill news. Sissy's eyes narrowed in suspicion. She looked about the room again. Nothing in this room had been touched in years. Dust covered everything. It even covered the table where Ava had placed her hands only moments ago.
What is this joke that Talmia keeps playing on you?
Sissy asked anxiously. Ava's eyes seemed to flare with golden light as her brow pulled low into an angry gaze. The phantom breeze came back and the candlelight began to flicker heavily again.
Talmia keeps trying to tell me that I'm dead.
The room suddenly flew into darkness as all the candles puffed out. A winter cold began to fill the newly darkened space as Ava seemed to vanish into the shadows. Silence was the only palpable presence in the room now. This silence was perilous. For several moments, Sissy just sat in the quiet blackness of the mildewed room with only the sound of her own scared breath to keep her company.
I am not dead!
Ava's skeletal and gossamer face abruptly appeared out of the lightlessness, screaming in defiance. Wispy, spectral claws flew at Sissy's face and neck, scratching them relentlessly. They threatened to slice her open and empty her of blood drop by drop. Sissy quickly fell back in the chair and rolled away from the raging spirit. She looked about the room and saw no sign of the wraith. Her hands began to fumble with her satchel, but before she could grab anything of use, her body was slung across the room. She hit the opposite wall with a sickly crack sound and fell to the floor. While she lay there in pain, she heard the spirit circling over her.
I am Queen Ava Duvalier. I have been the vessel of the greatest Lord. I have felt the spirits of the invisible realms push through my veins like a liquid flame, and you would dare accuse me of death? I have met death many times. If I had died, do you not think that I would know it?
While the spirit ranted in anger, Sissy pulled a few items from her satchel. She crouched on the floor and quickly took a shot of rum and placed the rest of the bottle on the floor before her. Then she stuck a cigar between her teeth and lit it with a match. Sissy inhaled the smoke deeply and then blew it out onto the bottle of rum. She started speaking through the fragrant cigar smoke.
Come, Baron. Accept these gifts and bring one of your dead that has remained here too long back home.
Ava's spirit suddenly came out of its tirade when it heard Sissy's voice. It began to crawl across the ceiling towards Sissy with a spider-like movement. But just as it was about to fall upon her, Sissy seemed to turn into shadow. The shadow swirled but for a moment, and then a tall, slender man stepped forward wearing a top hat, black tailcoat, dark glasses, and he had cotton plugs in his nostrils. His face was painted like a skull, and he was puffing on a cigar with obvious pleasure. In his left hand he held a cane, which he pointed directly at Ava.
There you are, Queen Duvalier. I have missed our talks. Where have you been, my dear? Come, walk with me and let us catch up. I have much to show you, my queen.
The spirit's face softened. Ava's warm acorn skin began to return to her cheeks, and she slowly descended back to the floor. She stood before the odd figure with tears starting at the edge of her eyes.
Where have you been, my Baron? I have missed you so.
The shadows swirled like smoke up their bodies until they were both engulfed. A breath later, the smoke dissipated, and all that remained was Sissy's exhausted form slumped on the floor. It was almost 30 minutes before Sissy got back up from the floor and made her way back outside. The door to the room was unlocked, to Sissy's surprise, and soon she was breathing the humid night air again. Mamma Toups stood amongst the forest like a regal owl. Nothing seemed to escape her gaze, but there was a worry there as well. Her cheeks belied a nervous tension that evaporated as soon as she saw Sissy had emerged alive. Sissy approached warily. She had several questions, but couldn't organize them in her mind. Mamma Toups just hushed her as she started tending to the scratches on Sissy's neck and face. The ointment that Toups applied to her scratches immediately alleviated her pains and calmed her spirit down. It was a caring act which showed she did care, and that was one thing Sissy needed to know right now. After the wounds were treated, the pair sat in silence for a bit, just glad to have each other's company. Then Mamma Toups began to explain.
When I met you, child, I saw the life of a witch in your stars. You had already seen so much pain and horror, but you had defeated it and been reborn from it. I knew I was to be your teacher in that exact moment. And I also had an explanation for one of my own lingering questions. Queen Ava Duvalier had been my teacher as I am yours. When she died, her spirit remained, and I did not send it on like I should have. I did not know why. It seemed cruel to do that to a woman I respected and loved, but I knew I couldn't send her on. When I met you, I realized why. She was supposed to be your last lesson, because she carries within her 2 lessons that you were meant to learn here tonight. First is how to send an angry spirit onto the invisible realms on your own. That is always the last lesson. And you did very well, but there was something else for you here. Do you know why Queen Ava Duvalier was a spirit and had not moved on?
No.
Sissy answered honestly.
Witches deal with the low and spirit realm all our lives. We wake up with it, and when we sleep, we dream of it. After years of living like this, it can be tricky to tell the difference. There will come a day when you sit next to someone on a bus or stand next to them in line waiting for your coffee, and you will take little notice of it, How often do you really notice a stranger sitting next to you after all? Then later that night, you'll think back and suddenly realize that it was a spirit you were sitting next to. Right now, you would notice immediately. But in time, they will become so normal to you that you might not even notice them. Queen Ava de Valier did not move on after she died because she didn't even notice that she had died. The world, with all its spirits, looked completely normal to her. She spent so much time in both worlds that she eventually didn't notice the difference anymore. That is a lesson that you were supposed to learn. I have heard the low, and many have said that you needed to know this. I do not know why as of yet.
The two gathered their things and began to head home. Mamma Toups spoke only one more time as they parted for the evening.
Thank you for helping Ava find her way. She can finally know peace. You may have to help me find my way one day as well.